Hello, welcome the Princeton Reviews webinar for professional development previously trained teachers. Tonight we're talking about the digital SAT and the changes that you can expect when teaching this test and how to get the resources you need to be able to work with your students. Tonight, presenting about these changes is our content developer as well as master trainer, Kenneth Brenner. He's been with the Princeton Review for 15 and a half years. And he, in fact, wrote much of the reading portion of our manual for the new digital SAT. So with that, if you want access to the teacher resources as well as recordings from a full-length training on the digital SAT, please reach out to your customer success manager. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Ken.
Hey, Susanna, thank you so much for that introduction and getting us started. And good, well, any time of day, depending on when it is you're watching this recording. So tonight's presentation is the digital SAT, what you need to know. As Susanna mentioned, my name is Ken. And what we're really trying to do is sort of take everything that we've been told, everything we've experienced, and everything our students have told us as the digital SAT is now rolled out internationally and very close to being rolled out in the United States. It's already juniors this past fall 2023, depending on when you're watching this, took the digital PSAT. So there's already been some exposure among US students to the exam. Our agenda for tonight's presentation is first going to go over what's changing on the digital SAT. So what are the overall differences in the exam moving to a digital format? Then we're going to talk about what's not changing, like in broad strokes, what will be the exact same as it was on the paper and pencil exam. In the third segment, the exam overview, we're going to actually show you how the exam displays on screen and go a little bit deeper into the structure of the new test. In the strategy updates, you're going to see some global and section-specific strategy changes. So that's for the overall and the math, reading, and writing. That'll be, just tweaks to what you know from having been trained on the paper and pencil exam. And then we're going to run through a few different resources you should know about as a partner teacher with us. So let's hop right on into it. We say, what's changing on the SAT? It's important to understand that the SAT is going digital, not online. In other words, while the exam is taken on a computer-based format, the exam is not going to be an exam you access by going to a URL in a web browser. And this kind of matters for the next slide, but just, one of the things we're trying to do is to be very clear. You are taking the test on a computer, right? But you're not, there's differences between maybe students who had done, AP work during the pandemic or something like that. So one big difference is some online exams are able to taken from the comfort of your own home. Well, no, the SAT is going to be taken at a testing center. And one thing the College Board is doing to sort of allow that to happen more easily is they're increasing the frequency or availability of SAT school days. These are special windows and administrations that school districts are allowed to offer in school that are outside of the 7 national SAT testing dates. So, you might hear more about people taking the exam at the end of March or the middle of April, which are times that are not traditionally SAT testing times. The exam is still proctored in person. So basically, you should almost think of it as the student is still going to their school or a nearby school to take the SAT, and they still have a proctor watching them. It's just that they're working with a computer, laptop, or tablet rather than paper and pencil. So I'm trying to make a big deal about that it's not online. What's happening here is that students prior to their test will be asked to download the digital SAT app, which is called Blue Book. And there'll be a little bit more on that towards the end of the presentation. Now, this is going to be taken on a laptop or a tablet. Now, the school can provide these devices, but students are actually allowed to bring their own device. And prior, again, to the test date, if they are using their own device, they should have had the Blue Book app already downloaded. And the cool thing about it is, once the Blue Book app is downloaded and the student has opened their registration for that exam and begun testing, even if the school's Wi-Fi cut out, the student will be able to take the entire exam without interruption, and then the exam will be stored safely in the app. And then once connection is restored, the app will be uploaded. The test will be uploaded to College Board servers. So yeah, it's another reason we kind of say it's not really an online test. It's just a digital test taken on a computerized modality. So another big change, right? What's changing on the test is that this is a test that clocks in just over 2 hours now instead of 3 hours. So, really, I think the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that means is that the sections are shorter, right? But previously, you had sections that were almost an hour in length. Reading was 65 minutes, math calculator was 55 minutes. Now, and we'll go more into this in the structure, no section is more than 35 minutes long. There's also fewer questions on the exam. The paper and pencil SAT has 154 questions. The digital SAT just has 98. And I think these things added together create a scenario where we are expecting, and so far the track record has been, a lot of reduced fatigue. It is easier to maintain an energy level by just nature of having an hour less. And our experiences in working with students so far, even working like one-on-one with students, as I often do, is that it's easier to fit their tests in. It's easier for them to complete the exam without a drop off in performance. Students will still have issues with timing, but you're getting a little bit less of a student just fading somewhere in the middle of the no calculator or the calculator section. So we consider this streamlined nature a positive change. If you're watching this, you may feel very ambivalent, right, about paper and pencil versus digital. But I would say streamlining the exam is an almost universally positive thing, at least in the feedback we've received and our perception. Now, we're talking about what's changing. So one of the questions that immediately came out was, wait. When you strip away an hour from the test and you knock out 56 questions, how in the world am I supposed to get an accurate read of students' abilities? The digital SAT is computer adaptive. And what that means is the exam is going to alter its difficulty based on student performance. So students doing well on the exam will be given sections of harder questions. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Students struggling will then be given sections of easier questions. And in this way, the exam personalizes itself to the student. And so I do learn about the student's capabilities in just a little over 2 hours. So to go, this will come up a little bit later, but just to really clarify that, because I think there's always a question, what do we mean? Basically, when you get your first verbal module, the student performance on that module will affect if they get a harder or easier second verbal module. Then this repeats with math. So students get an average difficulty math module 1, and their performance on that will determine if they get a harder or easy math module too. So this is a way that College Board can claim, even as a shorter exam, it is still useful in demonstrating a student's college readiness. And again, that's a matter of fear still. It is their reasoning for why this could be equated equally with a 3-hour exam. Now, it's not all a million new things we as teachers need to get used to. There are some things about this test that are not changing whatsoever. College Board claims that the exam will continue to measure the same skills and knowledge that students are learning in high school and that matter most for college and career readiness. Let's interpret that. This is still an exam of ELA skills and math skills that you would reasonably expect someone who successfully completed 6th to 9th grade to know, right? Maybe 10th a little bit, but not really. So the same breadth of material is covered, as well as the same knowledge domains. The exam is still scored on a 400 to 1600 scale, and that allows the exams to be compared cross-compatibly. So in this opening year, particularly 2023 going into 2024, all of the juniors who did the exam fall 2023 will be able to be compared with the juniors who did the digital exam in spring 2024. It's the exact same scale, and we've already explained how they're going to be comparable. So to be clear, there's other things that aren't changing, but I think understanding that this is still a standardized test, that every skill that you've already gone through training with us for still very much applies, at least from a general perspective. It's scored the same way, and it's anticipated that it's going to be used by colleges the same way. We only, of course, have international student data so far, but none of our students have yet to report back to us that the digital SAT scores seem to impact their admission odds more or less than the paper and pencil exam did. Obviously, there's a lot of college administrations taking a wait and see approach, but I just want to reassure everyone, this is now the second time the exam has changed in 19 years. We have been through this before. I'm sorry, did I say second? I meant to say third. We've been through this a lot, right? We have now gone through multiple iterations of this exam, from 1600 to 2400, back to 1600, and now digital. So every single time there's a change, colleges wind up using it with the same frequency they did before. So certainly if you're watching this recording, you want to understand more about this test, because this is the only one you'll be teaching in the United States, starting with the March 2024 preparation. So let's dive a little bit deeper into these changes to understand them. Again, in the US, your only option will be the digital exam in March of 2024. I just said it. And only if you are, you're working with a student who has an accommodation that says for some reason they can't be staring at a screen, could be an eyesight thing, so many different reasons, right? That's the only way a student will be given paper and pencil. The actual time of real testing time is 2 hours and 14 minutes. And much like the current SAT, there's 2 verbal modules, a 10-minute break, and 2 math modules. In fact, on the SAT, it's only a 5-minute break, so you're getting twice as long. That's wrong, a 10-minute break, right? Same deal as before. The difference is, you might notice, these are reading, writing modules. So previously, there was a reading section and a writing section. Reading and writing are now combined together. So in each reading and writing module, there are 27 questions to do in 32 minutes. Slightly more than the first half of them will be reading comp, and slightly less than the second half of them, if that makes sense, will be writing in that order, reading, then writing. 2 of the 27 questions are experimental. So guys, on the paper and pencil exam, the experimental questions were handled in a weird section 5 that students would get sometimes. Now they're integrated into the section, but students will not be told which questions are experimental, and so they need to treat all the questions as if they mattered. Math, big deal, is now 22 questions in 35 minutes for both math modules. So there isn't a shorter section followed by a longer section. And here, same deal, 2 of the 22 questions in each module are experimental. So in all 4 modules, there are 2 questions that will not count towards the score. Now, a big difference comes here. I've already mentioned that performance within a module determines the difficulty of the second module and the potential score range. So when I'm given the first RW module, if I do well in it, I get a harder verbal module 2. If I do poorly in it, I get an easy verbal module 2. Since reading, writing, and math still break down to 800 points, if you get access to the easier module, your score will have a cap on it. We don't know that exact number, but you're not going to be scoring in the high 6s or the 700s if a student is given the easy second module. So there's a limit. And if any of you have any experience working with grad students, this is exactly what the GRE does. On reverse, if you get access to the harder module, then it would be possible to get the absolute best scores, which are still up to 800 in each section. Here's another thing. On the paper and pencil exam, every single question was worth 1 raw point. But now, questions are weighted both based on difficulty, so a harder question will be worth a little more than an easier one, and how easily a student can comprehend the text or question. So this is sort of a developing thing in the field of psychology. Asking the question, it may not be that they didn't remember the content. It may be that the question itself was asked in a bizarre manner. So the more oddly College Board words the question, they might then assign more weight to that question. If you're wondering, College Board has basically released 0 information on this weighting. We've been able to build our practice to test based on over analyzing probably all of the scoring data from released exams. And we think we've done a really good job at approximating it, but this is a closely guarded secret. We doubt that they're ever going to explain what their weighting system is. It's one way that they sort of keep things proprietary. Reading, writing questions are all multiple choice like before, and they each come with their own text. So you guys might enjoy that. Your students anyway, maybe you. There's no more long passages. And I'll speak more about that in just a moment, but it's kind of cool that we don't have to bother with, an 800-word text about, should the crown be hereditary in England? So definitely a bonus there. And finally, math questions are about 75 multiple choice and 25% fill-in, which is the new name for gridded. And students will have a calculator for both math modules. So there's another change for you. There is no more calculator versus no calculator section. They are both calculator sections. So we've sort of bolded the biggest changes here, just so you can kind of keep it. And this is a really good snapshot if you need to recall anything about the test at large in just, in a moment. Now, here is how the exam will display to students in College Board's Blue Book app. So what you have is the passage. This is for reading and writing. The passage on the left, and the only question for that passage will be on the right. Remember, every question has its own passage. Then there will be 4 answer choices. You'll also notice that there's a variety of tools present on this screen. So first of all, in the top right, you'll notice that one thing students can do is they can drag text and highlight it. That's on the top left. And in the top right, they can click annotate. That allows them to highlight text. And then it brings up a little annotation box in the bottom. So a student clicks annotate, they highlight what they want to highlight, and then they're given the option of adding an annotation. So if you look at this vocabulary question, similar to a vocabulary and context question that many of you know, the student has highlighted, due to their often strange images, highly experimental syntax, and opaque subject matter, they've said that John Ashbery's poems can be difficult to what? Well, with strange images and highly experimental syntax and opaque subject matter, the student said difficult to understand, which makes sense. And what they can do is they can save that annotation so that then if they move their mouse over the text, it'll say that what they annotated there is the word understand. And this could then be used to help them with the process of elimination. It's worth telling all of you that annotate and highlight will only be available to the students on the reading and writing modules. They will not be available on the math. College Board, for some reason, didn't think students would ever want to highlight something on math. An odd choice. 2 other skills that are worth seeing. On all modules, students will be able to access an answer eliminator tool in the top right, circled in blue. This is really cool as it actually is a POE tool. So once you click the answer eliminator, by clicking any of the boxed off letters on the far right of your screen, they can actually strike through an answer and then undo that strike through if they change their mind. Students can also opt to mark a question for review, flagging it in the system to be able to return to it later. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there's a black box in telling students what question they're on. If they click that box, it brings them to their review page. And on the review page, a lot of information is given. First, the little GPS symbol tells them what question they're currently on. A blue box means the question has been answered. A blank box means the question has been unanswered. And a box with a flag has been marked for review. Not only that, but students can actually click on any of these boxes and go to a question. So if you think about our skills and how we talk about doing the exam in 2 passes, this student has done a pretty good job skipping around. And now that they've answered 27, they're probably going to start jumping back to their flagged questions. And rather than clicking all the way back to question 3 to get started, they can just click box 3 and it will take them right to question 3. So the answer eliminator, mark for review, and the review page are available on all 4 modules. Highlighting and annotating are only available on verbal. Now, when student finishes a module, the review page will come up automatically and tell them to check their work before they move on to the next section. And keep in mind, on the official exam, you're not going to be able to hit next until the timer actually expires. On the math side, most of the math questions, like 70% of them, will just be more straight calculation problems. So, we would have called these like plug and chug problems or just, non-word problems on the current SAT, paper and pencil. And if you notice, the answer eliminator tool is there and the students are able to scroll to look at these answers. Although you can't highlight an annotated math, you instead get a calculator and a reference sheet in the top right. Now, the calculator on the SAT, on the digital SAT, is not a weak 4-function calculator. This is an a version of the Desmos graphing calculator. So my math folks watching this presentation might be familiar with Desmos already. This is an exceptionally powerful tool where you're going to be able to do 4 functions, but you're also going to be able to do things like square roots, absolute values, inequalities. You're going to be able to graph things. You can actually expand this and make it much larger. You can enter in multiple lines or curves and view where they intersect. And just in general, there are many more questions on the digital exam for which the calculator is explicitly helpful, more so than I think the paper and pencil exam, which we're all used to. Then, every time the student gets a fill-in or grid-in, they are going to get these instructions on the left-hand side. They only appear on fill-ins. Also, fill-ins are not resigned to the end of the section anymore. They appear interspersed with multiple choice. You might get 3 or 4 or 5 of them in a row, but you could just as easily get multiple choice fill in, multiple choice fill in. So just be aware that they're much more integrated now, and these directions are produced every time. More on what you can put into a fill in a little bit. So the format of the test, not only has the dispersal method of the test changed, but the formatting has changed quite a bit. And it's changed enough that we've had to make updates to our strategies. And that's what this 4th segment and sort of the main event of tonight is, to help you as Princeton Review partner instructors know what you need to adapt as you start preparing students for the digital SAT. So here are the updates to our major strategies. First, personal order of difficulty. Now, in personal order of difficulty, we always told students to take the easy test first. But now things are much simpler. You no longer need to worry about which reading passage you're doing first. Instead, with only 22 questions in math and 27 in verbal, you really need to skip around that much more and make sure you earn every single point that you should. That mattered before, but now that your performance on Module 1 affects what sections you get for Module 2 and what your total score is, it's more important than ever to take every point incredibly seriously. We're not going to be sacrificing questions quite as often as we did previously. And so we really need a solid game plan for understanding what should I do and what should I move on from. Once the student has learned which questions are in their strengths and which ones are not, from there, we talk about pacing. We've really expanded our pacing advice beyond just saying it's efficient time management. So when a student looks at a problem that their personal order of difficulty says, I can do this quickly and easily, like before, they answer and advance to the next problem. If a student sees a problem that they think they might be able to do, but aren't sure, they just click next and go to the next problem. They don't make any type of mark on it. If a student sees a problem that they think they're not going to be able to get in a million years, they enter a random guess. In our materials, we've gotten rid of letter of the day because now that there's only 98 problems, there's going to be depending on the student, there's only going to be a handful that you're skipping. So the statistical impact of choosing the same letter, if it was even there before, is basically gone. If you loved letter of the day and your students respond to it, go ahead, tell them letter of the day. But any random guess is fine, because the point of guess and go is to remember that you're supposed to keep moving. You're not supposed to sit there and say, ooh, is it better to always put in B? Is it better to randomize? What's better is to throw in a letter and get to the next problem. And speaking of, there's also mark and move. Mark and move is when you thought a problem was going to be answered in advance, and then you're like, whoa, I should have skipped or guessed on this one. In that case, mark it and move forward. Later in the exam, you'll probably come back to your marked questions before your skipped questions, just because you've already spent some time on them. And then 3 and 4 I've covered, so I won't beat home, right? These are sort of things we're adding to reading and writing that are necessary, and math, that are necessary because of the change in the exam. Lastly, on POE, like, we should be making extremely strong use of that answer eliminator tool, since we're no longer able to cross off answers on the page. So these are, in a nutshell, the big global strategy updates. Now let's get more specific. So in the reading and writing sections, I've already explained that they're part of the same section. And what's cool about them is the order is always consistent. I've always said reading comes first, writing comes second, but even the way they're organized will follow a very, very consistent order. So students should identify which types of questions they're stronger with and jump around and sort of do the questions in batches. So if I'm good at vocabulary, I do all the vocabulary and then I move on to my next strongest area. If I'm better at transitions, I might jump all the way to head to transitions in writing and do those first. In reading, we've redone the reading question types and we've made 8 of them, and they're really all pretty distinct from each other, with some exceptions. And they all appear in the same order, but you might not all get 8 of the reading question types in a given module. For any question type there are multiple questions with, those are always arranged in the same order of difficulty. Writing. Writing is broken up into 2 areas: rules questions, which are based on punctuation and grammar. For these, regardless of if it's punctuation or grammar, they'll go up from easy to hard. Then, under rhetoric questions, the first type of rhetoric question will be transitions. And again, within transitions, we'll go from easy to hard. And then finally, there's a new question type called rhetorical synthesis. And within those, we'll go from easy to hard. So really, there's 8 reading question types, and there's effectively 3 writing question types. And within each one of those, the difficulty will go easy to hard and then reset. Keep in mind, you might just get 1 rhetorical synthesis question or 1 main idea question in reading. If there's only 1 of a question, it's going to be very difficult to quickly determine if it's getting easy, medium, or harder. So this is kind of a welcome change, though, in the fact that the order is always very reliable. And this is like the first time in the exam's history, at least in the last 20 years, that there's some order of difficulty to reading and writing. It always used to just be a complete blended bag. So let's specifically talk for just a moment about each of the sections, starting with reading, the first half of the reading and writing section. Things that we're getting rid of. I've already mentioned no more 800 words passages. That also means, though, that there's no reordering of the 5 passages anymore. There are no line reference questions, and with 1 question per text, passage-based chronology is just irrelevant now. Another thing, your vocabulary questions are not testing common everyday words anymore with 4 different meanings. So you're not going to see the word brilliant underlined in the text. And then the options are like bright, massive, shining, and dull. It's not going to be common words with multiple definitions. You'll see in a moment, we are upping the level of vocabulary on this test. The best evidence questions are gone, right? So unfortunately, or fortunately, so is the entire parallel process of elimination technique. And also, it's not like you're getting 1 literature passage, 2 social studies, and 2 science anymore. There are going to be, and as you'll see, more literature topics. They're going to make up a slightly larger ratio than they did before. And finally, there aren't any questions, at least up to this recording, that explicitly ask for the author's tone or the author's attitude. They're kind of worked into questions in other ways. So here's what we have. Although we don't have line references and chronology anymore, answers are going to be easier to find because passages are only about 150 words long at a rough maximum. And some of these passages might literally be a sentence, like vocabulary passages are usually really short. Other times, they can be, even though they're 150 words, they can be like 4 very big, dense sentences. Literature text. So you'd sometimes get stories written in the last century. All of the literature texts on this exam are public domain, so 100 or more years old. And whereas all reading passages used to have a blurb, only literature passages will have blurb now. And in addition to short stories and novels and essays, or short stories and novels and like plays, you are actually getting poems back as well as a literature topic. So that will certainly be an adjustment that we've definitely accounted for in our books. And then, as I said, you are getting more advanced words. If you've been doing SAT for a long time, they're probably not as advanced as they could get from like 2004 to 2015, but they get up there. Like we've seen verisimilitude on a released exam. So the words are harder than they were for sure. We've taken our question types, we've reorganized them a little bit. So again, vocabulary is a much more frequent question type than it used to be now. Purpose questions are still like rhetoric questions. Dual text replace like dual passage questions. So you can get 2 different authors and you're sort of asking how one replies to the other. Retrieval is still about a detail. Main idea is still about main idea. Claims are about arguments that are made in the text and illustrating, supporting, or weakening them. All of the charts questions that could have been in reading or writing are only in reading now, and they're very similar to claims questions. And finally, conclusions questions ask students to complete a text with a logical conclusion. One thing worth noting, retrieval and main idea and claims and charts can kind of be mixed together, but otherwise the questions go in this order. And remember, you don't have all of them in every single module. You might get all 8, but you might just get 6 or 7 of them. We've updated the reading basic approach. A lot of it is still the same. You still start by reading the question, but now you do want to understand which of the 8 types you're dealing with, because that's going to impact how you tackle the problem. You still go ahead and read the passage, and now instead of underlining, we highlight. And as you saw before, when necessary, we annotate. And our materials talk about when and when not to do this. We still use POE. You'll see in our black lines and stuff that we've given some new names to these traps that we hope better defines them. But if you know the reading basic approach and you've taught it a lot, I don't think the new one is going to be difficult for you to use. Steps 1 and 2 will be part of every reading and writing question, and steps 3 and 4 are going to change depending on which reading and writing question you're given. So, there isn't like a reading approach, an editor approach, and a proofreader approach. All questions on the verbal module start with steps 1 and 2, and then you change up the rest of your plan from there. So that's reading. Let's talk about writing. The distinction between proofreader and editor is gone. Everything has a question now. And in fact, there's now a blank instead of an underlined portion. So the students are no longer looking for errors and potentially picking no change. There are now 4 unique answers and only one of them appropriately fits in the spot. I mentioned before that once you switch to the writing questions, first you get rules, then you get rhetoric, which is broken into transitions and rhetorical synthesis. Just like reading, The topics are science, history, and culture, and humanities. So there's basically no literature sources on the writing half of the section. There are a lot fewer writing topics and questions. I mean, some things that used to be on the SAT are just gone. And that makes sense because there's fewer questions. So let's take a look at about how these things correlate. If you think about the current book, the paper and pencil book, in the words part 1 chapter, you're still doing tense, subject, verb, agreement, pronouns, and transitions. But precision, like word choice or accurate language, is pretty much all part of reading now. And as far as we can tell, we're not being tested on picking answers that are the shortest but are still grammatically correct. So concision is out. So you still have those topics in consistency. Precision's part of reading, concision's out. Editor stuff. Pretty much none of the editor stuff is on the exam. You are given goals to accomplish in rhetorical synthesis, so that's most like editor purpose questions, but everything that's a graph is part of reading now. Punctuation is pretty much the same rules as normally, but there are now lists with semicolons, right? So if you have a list that already has commas between like words and descriptions, well, that list needs to be set off by semicolons, otherwise the commas would be confusing. Idioms and frequently confused words are not tested anymore. It doesn't appear that comparisons or parallelism will be tested the way they appear in words part 2, but there are modifiers and there are questions about complete sentences being made complete or incomplete by the lack or addition of extra words. So as you can see, the verbal changes are pretty dramatic. Continuing, there is now a rules-based approach very similar to the current proofreader one, where you're looking at the answers to see what's being tested. The vertical line test is gone, unfortunately, because students can no longer write on the booklet. You can't draw a vertical line. So instead, the books try to go in being aligned more with conventional grammar. Independent clauses, dependent clauses. And a lot of work was done to make the terms make more sense. So necessary versus unnecessary is a little bit arbitrary. So instead we use the term specifying information and extra information. Does the info need to be there because it's actually pointing out a detail that's relevant, or is it completely extra? So we will be highlighting subjects, items in lists, or the antecedent to a pronoun. We'll be annotating singular or future tense. So highlight and annotate will be used in writing just like they are in reading. The weirdest addition, right, is these rhetorical synthesis questions of which a student could see 1 all the way up to 5, I think, on a single module. Here, a student has written a series of notes and you're looking to pick an answer that accomplishes a goal based off those notes. These are actually really, really, really simple questions. First of all 4 of the answers get the content from the notes correct. And so you're pretty much able to just go right to process of elimination because only one of the 4 answers is pretty much ever going to match the purpose. Like if the student wanted to compare 2 planets, only one answer is actually going to make a comparison between 2 planets in it. So those are the broad strokes of writing. Let me keep rolling here. What about math? Well, I already covered one piece of this, actually a few pieces, that it's about the same split as before. Before there were slightly less than 25% gridded, so it's been brought up to 25%. And again, big changes that they're mixed together. This is about the same mix, 70% pure math, 30% word problems. We mentioned that students are allowed to bring their own calculator, but there is a built-in Desmos calculator that just makes some of these questions ridiculously straightforward. Word problems on the whole are shorter. They don't approach the same lengths as the old SAT ones. On a fill-in question, it is now possible to enter negatives where it wasn't before, and you're able to enter 5 characters and plus a negative if needed, rather than 4 before. And then all the questions are in a rough order of difficulty. So it roughly increases from 1 easier to 22 quite hard. You should know, like, the disparity in math is, I think, stronger than the disparity in reading and writing. We've had a lot of students, it won't tell you, but we've had a lot of students know that they got the harder math module because they were just hit in the face with more difficult stuff almost immediately. The breakdown of math content is 35% algebra, 35% advanced math, 15% problem solving and data analysis, 15% geometry and trig. So let's break that down. First, algebra was 61% of the old exam, but don't be fooled. Advanced math is just nonlinear algebra, you know, curves, parabolas, quadratics, exponents, roots. So algebra is 70% of this test. Problem solving and data analysis is less than it used to be because the word problems are shorter. They're not going as heavy on the stuff that requires problem solving. And geometry and trig is a bit more. It was about 10% of the old exam. As I said before, there are some ridiculously easy questions on the easy module, just like there's a lot of hard questions on the harder module that make timing very difficult. Most of our high scoring students are consistently missing the final 5 or 6 questions on hard module 2. A lot of there's more questions about math vocabulary than there were before. There are problems with larger, uglier numbers, so you definitely see decimals. You definitely get weird stuff on geometry. You get more emphasis on functions and weird functions than there were previously. Box and whisker and stem and leaf plots are back on this exam. They had not been on the test for a long time. There aren't as many problems where you can just make up a number like 100 and see what happens with the math. You can still plug in, but it's going to be on a problem where it's really obvious that it's variables in the questions and answers. Those extended thinking questions where 37 and 38 used to be tied together. No. Every question's individual. There's much more growth than decay there was. There is no more use of imaginary numbers. And the exam is testing margin of error, which it did not use to test in statistics. Okay, I know we threw a lot at you. So it's important that you guys know what resources you're going to have access to as you try to absorb and go deeper on the baseline stuff we covered this evening or today or whenever. First, here is what your professional development SAT instructor link looks like. And under the teacher view, you're going to find access to the 3 critical documents you need to prepare. 1, a PDF of our brand new digital SAT Manual 8.0. We spent the better part of a year prepping for this book, and it is much, much deeper. There is a lot more to do with students on each individual skill than there was before, especially in verbal. Then I'll show you in a moment, you have blackline decks, which are marked up slides that replace the digital blackline you would have had in the past. This is going to allow you to just go lesson by lesson. So you're not opening up an 800-page PDF. You're opening up individual black lines for the lesson that you're prepping for that week, that month, whatever. And of course, in a errata sheet, we try to never make mistakes, but once hundreds of eyes get on the book instead of a few, we start to see how we could have done certain things in a different way, or just little things that need to be corrected. Good, so you know, when there is errata, because this is a PDF, we're usually able to just correct it right away. The physical books, should your district get them may not have the most up-to-date corrections. So just know about the errata. And then here's what this looks like, right? So as you see, if I were teaching if I wanted to do the claims lesson with my students, or I wanted to work with them specifically on poetry, or I want to do functions or linear solving, I just need to open up the black line for that lesson. And again, these will be fully marked up slides with every teacher note and teaching point you could ever want. I know on the surface it could seem, wow, I've got to open up a lot of files now, but I think navigating through an 800-page PDF is equally tedious, especially if you're doing math. There's a whole half of that PDF that you're not very interested in. This is much better for targeting what you need to target. You should also know about College Board's Blue Book app. So you can download this from college's site. And it is used not only for students doing practice tests, but it's also for the real test administration. So what you can do is you can actually download this app and then create a student account with the College Board. Make sure that if you do this, you do make a student account. If you accidentally make an administrator account, because after all, you are a teacher, you're not going to be able to receive a score or review your results. So if you wanted to take a test similar to the ones the students will, make a student account. And we really do encourage you to take at least one test from the College Board Blue Book app to familiarize yourself with the testing environment and to practice using the online tools. If you have any questions at all about the material presented in this event, Susanna, who opened tonight's event, is susanna.fisher@review.com. My email address is tprkmb@gmail.com. And we'll leave this screen up, of course, as we close things out. So once more, whether you're watching this 24 hours after it was recorded, 24 days after it was recorded, or even 24 months after it was recorded, which is true dedication, we thank you for spending this hour getting caught up on the changes to the digital SAT. And Susanna, is there anything you want to add in closing?
I just wanted to thank you for that presentation that hit all the main points about the test changes. Some of them are exciting, and I think we'll have teachers interested in teaching these different strategies for the test. I want to reiterate that we have the resources that you need to help your students succeed. So you just need to either reach out to me or Ken, whose emails are on the screen, but also your contact at the Princeton Review, your customer success manager, your operations manager. We'll make sure that you have access to all your teacher resources. We'll be able to enroll their students in their own platforms that comes with a brand new ebook version of the manual and to get you started. So thank you again, Ken, and thank you to everyone who's been watching tonight.
Yes, thank you.